Institute, and I'm delighted to have many folks here participating in person at the Lunar and Planetary Institute, as well as those of you who are joining us virtually. So today's seminar is on adapting your talks. Let's go ahead and welcome everybody. I'm going to try advancing my slides. There we go. So this is part of our Sharing Planetary Science seminars, and this is a series. You can find all of the past recordings on our website, on our YouTube site. In addition to that, you can also find our resources on our scientist engagement website for past topics. Now, I wanted to make sure everyone's aware these webinars are for planetary scientists. They're intentionally discussion-based rather than presented as just lectures. This is because research does show that discussion enhances our understanding and critical thinking, as well as increases interest in the learning content. So people here in person are welcome to talk and share questions. Those of you online, please, there'll be points where we want you to add things in the chat and questions throughout, because we want this to be interactive. So our presenters today that you'll be hearing from, our first one is Oma. Wait, I've got too many things in my way where I can't see things. So our first one, there as well. Let me see if I can.
You should be able to X that out so that thing is out of your way.
Yeah. I'm trying to do it on both screens actually. So.
Christine?
Yes.
Did you want to do polls?
Yes, please. Thank you so much. Let's find out more about those of you who are present with us, and then we'll go to who we are. Thank you so much. So for all of you who are present with us, please feel free to go ahead and answer. We've got 2 questions here, so you'll have to scroll down for the second question. The first question is, what types of presentations do you have experience giving, or do you plan to give in the future? So we have options like classroom, museum, observing, talks at public events, online science lectures to general audiences, and other. And then below that, we do have a place where you can enter a little bit about which of these describes you: a scientist, an engineer, an educator, or public engagement specialist, a student, or something else. And so while you all are filling in the answers for that, Gabe, I'm going to pick on you. Out of the different types of presentations, do you want to share your thoughts in terms of what types of presentations you are interested in or have you given before?
I have done classroom presentations, and I've done talks at public events.
Classroom presentations and talks at public events. Paige, I'm going to pick on you as well. All of these, which of these have you done before?
I have probably done all of the above.
All of the above, all of the above. And Matt, I've got a quick question for you here. So which types of presentations have you given, or do you think you might be giving in the future? Class, and it can be all of these, it can be some of these: classroom, museum, observing sessions, talks at public events, online science lectures, other.
Definitely classroom presentations, talks, public events, online science lectures, and general audiences that have done those. What I like to do is museum presentations, actually.
So most of these, and you'd like to do museum presentations. Awesome. And I'm going to move some microphones over to you all. Right now, the ones on the table are muted. You can unmute them as you'd like. So let's go ahead. Grace, let's go ahead and end the poll and take a look at what the results are. So our results, classroom presentations, most of the people here with us have done classroom presentations, and also talks at public events. And then we've got a little bit of everything else. My mouse is hidden. There it is. And for those of us in the room to see, yeah, we're mostly scientists here. We do have some engineers and some educators as well. Okay, let's go ahead and let's stop sharing that. Awesome. Okay, so with us here today, we are going to be hearing from Dr. Oma Williams-Duncan. She's an associate professor of teacher education in STEM here at the University of Houston at Clear Lake. And we've worked with her on many things, and we're delighted to have her here. She's come all the way over in person to be here with us. We also have Paige Valderrama Graf, who's the science engagement and communications specialist at Jacobs, the Jacobs contractor lead for NASA's Astromaterials Research and Exploration Science Division here at Johnson Space Center. And she's also got, how many years have you been here?
Here in Houston, I've been here since about 2008.
Since about 2008.
Yeah.
So your experience as a science engagement and communications specialist is longer at this point than your many years as a teacher as well.
Absolutely.
And you've got many of years at that in Arizona too. So Dr. Sandlin Buxner was planning on joining us, and she sent me her slides. She has been called into the field and is not available after all. She might be joining us for Q&A though, so we might hear from her throughout. Grace, could you please quickly introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Grace Bodwin. I'm a science engagement specialist here at the LPI with Christine. Great to have you all with us.
Awesome. So with no further ado, our next question for all of our participants is about your goals. So what I'd like those of you online to do is to think about this and start to type, but don't hit return. We're going to do this in the chat so everybody can see it. I want you to think a little bit about what you'd like to learn in today's session or get out of today's session. So think a little bit, but you're not going to hit return until we say so. And we're going to give you all about 20 seconds. 20 seconds. These are on mute right now. Just push the button again. If you would. 5 more seconds. Okay, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go ahead and hit return on that chat, and we will see what everybody has to say. Grace, can you go ahead and read some of these for us?
Sure. So we have people saying that they hope to learn about pedagogy and technical techniques. I personally would like to be more prepared to adapt and improvise. People want to interest kids and young adults. We want to develop strategies and think about when engaging audiences, reaching different age groups with the same information, but at their level, which is a great and difficult thing to do. Learn how to improve my public outreach presentations, best practices, be more effective, learn how to assess if I have lost the audience and some tips on getting their interest back. That's a great one, Evan. And how to reach broader audiences in a meaningful way. So some really great goals.
Thank you. Does anyone else in the room have any other goals that they'd like to add? Okay, all right, let's go ahead and continue. So it's time for Oma.
So first of all, thank you so much for inviting me here. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all. So the title of my talk is Keeping Them Engaged, Top Recommendations for Adapting Science Talks. So before we launch into my activity that I have planned for you, a little bit about my background and what you're getting ready to experience. So in K-12 science education, we usually structure our lesson plans with something called the 5E lesson plan cycle. And a lot of that is attributed to Dr. Roger Bybee, his work with a group called BSCS. Unfortunately, I'm blanking on what BSCS stands for, but if you Google it, it is so common, you will likely find it right away. So this talk is basically, I would say, the first possible 3 sections of what we refer to as the 5E. So engage, explore, explain. And one of my mantras is that you always have to explore and explain on the same day. So without further ado, now that I've launched into that little side note, I want to say to you all, let's build. So I have an activity you're going to take part in, and we're going to use the chat since we have so few people here in person. So I'm relying on you in the chat, in the virtual community, to go ahead and respond to my question here. So the anchor question is, what do the following items have in common? So you're going to see 3 slides in a few moments, and I'm going to circle back to this question, what do the following items have in common? Particularly, it will be an image or images, followed by a demonstration, and then finally a video. So that's how you know we've gone through all 3 before you start putting things in the chat. So here's the first slide. It's a group of images. I need you to notice the top view and the front view. So hold on to your thought as far as what you're noticing. Now we're going to move on to the second slide. You have your choice between 2 videos. And let me pause for a moment. Someone in the chat did say, please repeat the 5 E's. So very quickly, the 5 E's are engage, explore, explain, elaborate, and finally evaluate. This particular talk is structured on the first 3 E's: engage, explore, and finally explain. And thank you, Paige, for putting BSCS up there as far as that acronym is concerned. I appreciate that so much. So now back to my slideshow here. I have 2 video choices, and if I had a wide audience, I would be able to quickly assess the room and potentially choose. I would also potentially ask the audience to share which video they would like to see. So I'll go ahead and do that. So in the chat, just tell me which video you would like to select and see. Is it the Big Bang Theory video or the Third Rock from the Sun video? Which one meets your fancy? And then the folks in the room, Big Bang video, raise your hand, or Third Rock from the Sun? Third Rock from the Sun? Third Rock, okay, all right, smiles are on the faces. So far we have 2 here. And just like I thought, Third Rock from the Sun is what's the most popular. So I'm going to go ahead and play this little 30-second clip, and hopefully this will work okay. I think it's coming up. It's taking a few seconds to load, not a problem. So while this is coming up, I want to just mention very quickly, Third Rock from the Sun had an earlier air date, and that's the one that I really thought the audience was going to choose. So this is an ad. So let's pause it.
Being a little difficult.
Yes, it is.
And yeah,
Right here? Or-
no, it is this one.
Okay.
It is this one. Okay, let's go back to the beginning. And we're not hearing the sound because we didn't enable the sound.
And we only need to play the first 30 seconds of it.
Okay.
So we're having some small technical difficulties, everyone. Apologies.
I don't know if they're going to hear the sound or not. Let's find out.
Okay, so if you
Oh.
can hear the sound.
I've got the sound on my computer muted, so that way we're not getting echo.
Okay. Oh, one other thing.
Mhm.
Click on new share,
Click on what?
new share right there.
Uh-huh.
And click on share sound.
Yeah.
That'll do it. Okay. And then click on PowerPoint, or rather,
Yeah.
whichever one you want.
Let's see how that works.
All right, we're still taking.
Okay, so thank you for helping me with the technical part. Okay, so remember, your question is what are you noticing about these images, experiences so far that you are experiencing? So one comment is, this illustrates why I try to keep my PowerPoint and video separate. Good, but both were 3D. Good. Okay, so we're getting this feedback. This is good. And I would always welcome feedback from my audience members, whether it's virtual or in person. So far, what are your observations between our images and video so far? What are you noticing?
Both are focused on Earth.
So, okay, so both are focused on Earth. What else?
They basically are both point of view.
Point of view.
Yeah.
Okay,
So you're coming in point of view through the solar system.
okay,
For the video, and the person's head.
okay.
It's viewing everything from your eyes.
Awesome. Okay, so possibly different perspectives of seeing these large concepts, planetary concepts. Okay, beautiful. All right, so I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint at this point.
And you've got a couple of things in the chat. Easy to understand, 3D, both show planets and moons. Actually,
Mix of topics, music, and focus on Earth at N. Beautiful. Viewing objects, concepts from different perspectives, both show planes and moons. Oh, planets and moons. Beautiful. So here's my last image. So the last image shows, first of all, a hand motion, and this is one that's dear to my heart. I have a really cool story that I don't have time to tell. But if you take a look at the picture shows an oceanic crust, which I want you to motion with your hand, and a continental crust, what I'd like you to motion with your fist. And as you bring your fist closer to your hand, naturally, the tips of those fingers start to move under. If you have any experiences with rock, paper, scissors, you probably that's probably coming to mind. So that's a beautiful memory. So this V point that's in the center between your fist and where your fingers are would be what we refer to as a subduction zone. So this motion is a hand motion or kinesthetic connection with something called plate tectonics. That's often experienced in, say, 8th grade. So I'd like you to tie it all together very quickly. What are some things that you notice about the images I selected, the video I selected, as well as now the demo I provided across the board in the chat? Anything that you'd like to mention, and I'll go back to my audience members here. Anything that you noticed?
so in the chat, some of them have said all three tried to show motion over time, or that it's a mixture of images and movement, or a mixture of topics with music, relatable, it's metaphors and models, and they seem to provide an interactive experience.
Other ideas? I can see the wheels turning. And this is good because all of this is actually part of my conversation as far as this presentation is concerned. When I say I can see the wheels turning, I'm actually looking at a gentleman's face and watching him. Okay, we're gonna move forward here. So how do you know your audience is engaged? Well, Fredericks and Mikulski really kicked off this research in 2012 with engagement methods and inventories that they actually did their research on, oftentimes in K-12 environments. And of course, that particular research took off and found itself in other environments. In the K-12 setting, what really was the takeaway from their work happened to be something that we refer to as slant. So you'll see it posted in a lot of K-12 classrooms. I also think about it as like reading the room or reading your audience members. So I literally am looking at participant faces to see, are their eyes forward? Are they giving me great facial expressions? Does it look like the wheels are turning? Are they connected? So you can easily assess whether or not your audience is engaged. And that's all, of course, based on how you actually set up your presentation. So as you're checking for engagement, and this is one of the reasons why we have something called Engage as we start our lessons, to essentially get everyone tied in and potentially tap some of those prior experiences and knowledge opportunities from their background so that we can potentially link it to our talks. That's one of the big things that we have to do is, of course, assess engagement. So SLANT stands for sit up straight and tall, listen, ears forward, ask questions, nod your head, and a big one is track the speaker. Oftentimes, track the speaker can also translate with older students as taking notes or even talking to the speaker. So that's just an assessment of engagement that I'd like to offer you. And then, of course, the last slide that ties everything together. So like I said, we're moving from engage. That was my little activity that I had for you all. Now into, or actually in explore, again, the activity that I had, but more importantly, me asking and interacting with the audience. And then finally, this is the video, this is the slide where we really get into what I like to refer to as explain. So here, this is where I'm hopeful that we are tying it all together. So for the purposes of this talk, I was supposed to mention to you or provide recommendations for engagement. I wanted to make my point super simple. So distilling it all down, I say plan it, make it, and practice it. What that essentially means here is when you plan it, come up with your questions with expected answers. So I was really hoping that you were going to pinpoint that I was trying to make something relatable, and you said it. I wanted you to figure out that there was a theme throughout. So some of the adult themes were motion as well as perspective, which was excellent. Know your audience. I had a strong suspicion that you were going to choose Third Rock Over the Sun, which was like something that resonates with all of us, depending on your age group. And specifically here, I have to grab my notes. I want to make sure I quote this accurately. So Third Rock from the Sun aired 1996 to 2001, whereas Big Bang aired 2007 to 2019. So you have to know your audience as far as what's going to resonate with them. And then when you make your presentation, hopefully you saw a little bit of the humor in there. It was interactive, even though it was a virtual environment. I specifically also made sure it was multimodal. So whenever possible, auditory, kinesthetic, and visual opportunities are present. And then finally, making it connective. So accessible examples. If you have any experience with playing rock, paper, scissors, that demonstration where your hand sort of just automatically goes underneath or possibly on top, and you can talk about convergent boundaries, divergent boundaries, and all of that. It just really brings some wonderful memories to you, possibly. And then of course, skinny, make it skinny. And what I mean by that is just getting it to the salient points, distilling it all down. This particular slide is super important. As I stated before, explore and explain have to happen on the same day. When I'm working with my EC through 6 pre-service teachers, I always say, if you don't explain, what ends up happening is those kids go home thinking they just had this cool experience and they never know why. So this slide really hopefully brings it all together. And finally, you practice it. I jokingly said before I came here, I was practicing, trying to make sure that I said everything that I needed to say to make sure I hit the high points. And then with that, I just want to say thank you so much. And if you want a copy of this presentation, you can always scan the QR code. And finally, all my contact information is there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to Paige, but while we're in the process of moving on to Paige, if any of you think of other questions that you would like to ask Oma or Paige throughout, please, you are welcome to enter them into the Q&A or into the chat. If the chat gets really busy, keeping them in the Q&A means that it's going to be easier for us to find. That's all. So, great.
Well, hello, everyone, and hopefully you've taken away a lot of great information from Oma, because she really gave some really valuable things to think about when you're putting together presentations. I myself always use the 5E model to get those folks engaged that you're connecting with. Getting them right off on the start, on a good start, on a good note is so very important. But as I give you sort of my briefing today about adapting your talk, I want you to keep in mind that you should think about these strategies, whether you're connecting with in-person audiences or virtually. All of these same types of strategies can apply. And my number one recommendation is to understand your audience and event goals. If you understand your audience, whether it's an in-person audience, a virtual audience, you're connecting with them at a display table, whatever the case may be, knowing your audience and event goals will help drive your content considerations, the audience interactions that you have with those that you're connecting with, as well as even the questions that you ask. And my little sort of box there at the bottom is kind of sort of, in my mind, thinking about when you're engaging with an audience, you want to help build and enhance their knowledge and interest. You really want to feel connected or help them feel connected with you and the content that you're sharing. You want them to feel acknowledged, like they're doing a good job, that they're there with you and you're happy they're there and they just feel like they're a part of what you're sharing. And then fourthly, you want them to experience success. When our audience members feel successful, they like being there. If they're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what's going on, then they're not going to feel all that great about things. So keep those things in mind. Well, if you think about it, sometimes you end up being called up to give a talk and your audience range is sort of a wide range of participants. You can see on this little slide here, we did a recent webinar where our participants were grades 4 through 12 plus educators. And so that's a wide span of participants. So what do you do when you have such a wide varied audience? Well, one of the things that I aim to think about is if you make the presentation sort of a general audience presentation, sort of like you're talking to a 5th grader or a 6th grader, so to speak. So if you make the presentation somewhat general, but in your talking points, you can look out at your audience, read who you have in the room, and speak up a level in terms of the terminology you're using, or bring it down a level based on your audience that you're connecting with. And if you look at your audience and you're reading them, and if they're like giving you this glazed over look, you know you probably want to make a switch. If you're looking at them and they're like, almost leaning in like that slant that Oma was talking about, then you know at least you've got them sort of engaged with you. So keeping things general, but knowing how to be able to level it up or down according to your audience. My second point here is to be able to ask questions that can be answered by participants successfully, no matter what their level of knowledge is. And I'll show you an example of that. The art of questioning, it's how to ask a good question is not an easy thing to do, but when you can find a way to ask a question that everyone can be successful with, that's going to really help engage no matter who's in your audience. My third point here is acknowledge your audience input. If you can say, oh my, that was a great answer, or someone who was online, that was a great response, I love how you pointed this out. Or if it's a school and you are just calling out the school name, that little bit of personal acknowledgement makes people feel like I was noticed, I was validated, and that makes them feel good. And also encouraging your audience to ask questions at a time that you decide. during your presentation or at the end, whatever the case may be, by enabling your audience and welcoming them to ask you questions, you get an idea where they are. What's the vocabulary they're using in their question that enables you to know how to be able to respond back appropriately. So really building that knowledge, excitement, interest, and making you and your content real and accessible is a great part of success. Let's see if I can move forward. So in thinking about content considerations, for many folks in planetary science, there's a lot of great stuff out there. And this little slide, I guess I've been thinking about DART lately. This little slide, I just want to point out a couple of things. One is, I just say DART. Is DART an acronym? What does it stand for? I don't know. I say targeting a binary system. Does my audience know what a binary system is? Or am I assuming they do, or should I explain it? 780 meters, 160 meters. I can see those are numbers. One is bigger than the other. But what does that size signify? So when you put together a slide thinking about your audience, think about, well, what do I really want to make sure they know? And maybe spell things out so they have an idea. For example, if you want to give them a sense of what that size, a set of size and numbers means, give them a graphic like this that can really help them see in comparison to things that they may be familiar with, whether it's a school bus or whether it's a Statue of Liberty or the Eiffel Tower, something where they really can sort of have a better connection to, oh, I now see and understand what those sizes are all about. Still focusing on the DART mission, because it's just sort of recent and kind of fun to think about. If you have a slide, whether it's talking about DART or some other type of content, a slide like this shows a lot of information. And your audience may be able to follow your description of what they're seeing on a slide. So if they can follow it, and an older audience may be able to look at something like this and kind of get a feel for what's going on, but a younger audience, it may be too overwhelming. So for a younger audience, if you can find a video or a graphic that you can talk to, breaking it down into piece by piece, what's going to happen in whether it's this mission or some other content that you're talking about, breaking it down into smaller chunks and talking to it while it's occurring is a really great asset for you and for your audiences. Now, still continuing on with content considerations, so often it's very important to kind of introduce yourself to your audience so that they know a little bit about your career path. And if you're talking to a younger group of kids, you might be like, oh, look, this was me when I was your age. And here's what I was thinking, and tell them your story. So this could be really effective for a younger group of kids. But if you're connecting with high school or college level kids, and your event goal is to help them understand areas of research they may pursue as part of their future career path, a slide like this may be much more appropriate. A slide like this for an elementary group of kids, a little bit too overwhelming. So you've got to really think about who is your audience and what's best for them. Also thinking about vocabulary. Most folks that come to a talk, they want to learn something. And if they can get a word that perhaps they're a little unfamiliar with, like differentiated worlds, for example. If you know your audience should already know this because they're a college class that's already in like advanced geology or whatever the case may be, you may use the word and then move on. But if it's maybe a high school group that may or may not have mastered this term, you may say the word, define the word, and restate the word in a variety of different aspects so that they're like, oh yeah, I got that. If you're dealing with a younger group of kids, maybe middle school, elementary school kids, you might say the word, but don't leave it at that. Define the word, but don't leave it at that. Illustrate it, pointing things out so they really get an understanding of what you're trying to illustrate, maybe even show them a model and then restate that term, and you can use it multiple times. So the sort of takeaway is giving learners context, visual aids, and opportunities to engage or for you to reinforce this new vocabulary and terminology. It builds their confidence, it builds perhaps their use of the terms, and it's just really super important. Moving on to sort of audience interactions and questions. I just have sort of a slide that shows pictures of engagements with students. Your sort of body language can welcome a group in. Notice if you're working with maybe a younger set of audiences, getting down to their level so that they're looking at you and you're inviting them in, very powerful. An older audience in sort of the bottom middle, you're kind of standing sort of at their same level, but you're still sort of a little bent in and talking with them. An older group of folks, like in the lower right-hand corner, they're sort of an older audience. It's okay to stand back a little bit and chat with them. But your body movements and the way you're engaging with them can really help your interaction. If you stand there with your arms folded and you're like waiting for someone to come up to talk to you, you're not giving a very inviting stance. If you're standing there open, smiling, you're inviting people to come over, and they may want to come over just because they're like, this person looks like I want to talk to them. But so think about those, body language and the way you interact and involve people. And I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but I wanted to also make sure you're listening. You're not just talking at your audience, you're talking to them and inviting them to give you input back. Somewhere I thought I had something like that on the slide, and maybe I did, but I'll reinforce that a little bit later on. But knowing it is a two-way engagement is so important so that they know they can express what they're thinking as well. And related to asking questions, so useful to ask open-ended questions. It's also sometimes hard to ask, how can I come up with an open-ended question? But a question like, here's a picture of asteroid Bennu. Share your observations. Whether you're 5 years old, you can say what you see. Whether you're a practicing geologist, you can say what you observe. So that type of question enables a wide variety of types of responses. It also allows you to get a better feel for, what does my audience here know, or maybe what direction might I want to head things in. Same, the example on the right, if you're dealing with a college level class and you're like, how would you guess what I have inside of this? That could work. But for a younger audience, if you're holding a bottle and you want them to figure out, we're talking about petrology here, how can you decipher what's inside of whatever it is you may be holding in your hands? You got to think about your audience, and is this appropriate for them, or are they going to feel like, I'm well beyond this? So you got to really, again, think about your audience and the goals. And when you do ask questions, make sure they're clear. Make sure that your questions promote thinking and always aim to enable success. If no one's answering your question, maybe they didn't quite understand it. So you might need to re-verbalize it as well. So in sort of closing here, my points to certainly be able to reinforce knowing your audience and the event goals will help you with those content considerations, audience interactions, as well as the questions asked. But you really, again, want to think about, how can I help my audience build and enhance their knowledge and interest, feel connected to you and the content that you're sharing, feel acknowledged like they're important too, as well as help them experience success. So that's what I had for you. I have not been able to look at the chat while things have come in. So if you put something in there and I didn't acknowledge it, I will say, virtually you can think about presentations, in-person presentations. Hybrid is probably the hardest, because to look, to read, to think about what you want to say, that is a special knack. And so my comments are over there. That's why I can't sort of see them here. But with that, I'll turn things back over to Christine and be able to look at and take questions.
Thank you so, so much. What I'd like to do, first of all, I'm going to give Oma back her microphone that I stole. And secondly, I'm going to make sure you have a microphone. We do have some more slides, but most of them are largely repetitive to what we already have been talking about. So what I'd like to do is start with a couple of questions to have both Paige and Oma respond to those. And one of the questions here was about mixed audiences when it's easier to prepare, of course, talks for similar ages in education. Paige, you mentioned a little bit about some of the things that you do. Oma, I wanted to give you a chance. Do you have any thoughts if someone is giving a talk to kindergarten through 5th grade, or, you know, ages 8 through 15. Are there recommendations you might give to that person who's planning that talk? Because most of us, if we're doing a talk for a museum, as we said earlier, a museum audience is great, but they're going to be mixed. You're going to have parents, you're going to have small children, you're going to have all the way up to teens, really. So.
First of all, good question. I think it is a little on the difficult side, but I'm a big advocate for audience participation. And so when you can call up students to come and help you, to help demonstrate things and items with you, that's always a plus. You really have to pre-think and pre-plan what you're going to have them to do. But I have seen elementary kids that are, you know, early childhood kids come up and hold something while you demonstrate, and they become a part of the opportunity. It ends up being very powerful. And then when you ask, very much like what Paige said, observation type questions, and you use words like, what are you noticing? What do you see, touch, taste, feel? In other words, you're literally breaking down the process skills in very manageable ways. That can be powerful as well. I personally have a tendency to, and it makes my sentences super long. I will say, what do you observe? And then come right back with, what do you notice? So in that little technique, and I usually am erring on the side of kids picking up on the context clues. I am using the high level language, and at the same time, I'm getting them to also use the language, or rather key in on the language that's accessible to them. So I am defining those words as well. So by handling it that way, you're able to operate at different levels. So distilling all that down, try to have audience participation, vary your questioning styles and techniques, be mindful of trying to insert context clues when you're talking, so that you're talking at various levels. I think that's how you handle it.
Awesome. Awesome. Paige.
And I just want to add, like in a classroom situation, when you are connecting with a group of students and you get some of those volunteers that come up, be aware of those kids that may not be volunteering, that are perhaps too shy, or you can see somehow that like they kind of want to be able to say something, but they may not feel confident enough to. So keep your eyes on, and the power of like giving them an opportunity to do something in groups, and then walking around and interacting with those kids and giving them that little bit of, you're doing a great job, even if they didn't say anything, can really be so powerful. But I agree with Oma, those kids, they love to be a part of what you're doing, and kids of all ages.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oma?
And Paige made me think of one other thing. Think, pair, share. Think, pair, share is a very quick and easy strategy to use, where you give students, participants, a few seconds of wait time. They're able to process and think about an answer to a question. And before they say it out loud, they pair up and have a brief conversation with their neighbor. In that way, it makes it audience friendly. But what happens during those conversations when they're pairing up is the more silent student or participant may get a chance to hear their thoughts being reinforced, or it gives them some thoughts. And then I always like to say, whenever you do think, pair, share, if you're going to do a cold call, meaning just pick on someone in the audience, always make the caveat with your think, pair, share that you get to choose whoever it is that you'd like to choose, but they get to say either what they heard or what they already thought about or even said in that pairing up. And that way, everybody always has something to say, typically, because of that brief conversation that happened right before they were called on.
Awesome. When I've been in situations back in the planetarium field where I was having people talk, I wanted to have my audience, it might be 200 kids and teachers, and it's in the dark. And so I could ask for questions and I'd have 100 of them raise their hands, but they all are asking, they raise their hands and, yes, Johnny, what would you like to say? Oh, my grandma makes the best cookies. And it's completely irrelevant to what we were doing, right? So in those situations, some of the techniques that I've tried to use was I would invite participants to do things that allowed them to, without using their voices, but using their hands, participate or something like that. So I might have them invite them to point to something. We're trying to share the camera. I might invite them to point to a particular star or a planet after I've already demonstrated it. And then it's the dark. I can't tell if all 200 are pointing at the right one or not. I say, I circle it, say, this is the right one. Clap your hands if you got it right. Just giving them that ability to respond without taking time to have 200 people individually give a response in the middle of something. So giving them the ability to respond physically, thumbs up and thumbs down, clapping their hands, anything that gives them the chance to participate if it's a really large audience. Is one other way to do that. There were questions earlier. Let's see. Let me see if I can scroll back up here a little bit.
And I did make the PowerPoint available. That link should be viewable at this point.
Thank you so much. And it will, we will take the final presentation minus any slides that shouldn't be up and also put them on the Sharing Planetary Science website. There were lots of great comments here, but there was a question here. How can you get close to kids in the classroom if you're asked to come and talk? You're usually standing at the front without feeling, when you're invited to speak in a classroom, and some of you in the room here have been as educators as well, do you ever, are there issues with inviting? How would you respond to that? Should a scientist feel like they're at the front and they need to sort of stay there at the front, or Paige?
I can sort of start, because I know for us here to be able to move our slides and be in a camera view, as well as be able to have the folks in the room see us, being in this one location sort of directed us to be here. But in a normal environment, I have some kind of pointer where I can move around to be able to get close, to people, or like interact with them or invite them in, and so that I'm not sort of stuck behind a podium, because that podium can sort of be that like, here I am, and there you are type of thing. Whereas if you are comfortable moving around, then it becomes a really powerful thing to be able to kind of also, if someone's drifting off from and they're not paying attention, if you walk over to them and they see you coming, it gets them to sort of perk back up. Oh, well, I better stop writing this note or falling asleep and pay attention. So I always encourage folks, if they're comfortable, because it has to fit you, but to move around and interact can be really powerful.
Thank you. Grace, can you see through the chat? Are there other questions that we haven't answered yet? And while you're thinking about that, if we have any questions in the room as well.
I guess
Can you turn on the button so they can hear your question?
my kind of main question's already been, I think, largely addressed, which was how you plan a talk for like an elementary audience in particular.
which we kind of touched on that a little bit already.
Yeah, folk, I do have a few slides to that end. I'm going to skip past. We've got some here that are we're grateful that that Sandlin put this in, but a lot of things that you've heard from multiple people, that enthusiasm. Some of you pointed out Paige's extreme enthusiasm during her presentation and how contagious that is. Oma, your presentation as well, very enthusiastic, and that enthusiasm is infectious, and that's really, really helpful for children. If there isn't that enthusiasm, you might not be able to keep their attention. And as was also mentioned, sorry about that. Yikes. Dismiss. The calling out participants by name, which Oma mentioned quite a bit, and so did Paige, that, you know, capturing who it is. Maybe a timer or a countdown sometimes. So sometimes, remember earlier I was saying you might want them to respond with like a hands up, a thumbs up or something, adding something like a countdown. Okay, on the count of 5, we're all going to point or clap our hands or thumbs up or thumbs, you know, something that gives them a sense of urgency before they respond. If it's a virtual program, a countdown before they enter their poll answers, something that gives a little bit of extra energy there, giving them a chance to speak up, actively participating, but keeping in mind their goals. A lot of kids, they want your attention. They want to know that you're paying attention to them, whether that's looking, smiling, giving them an opportunity to participate, giving them an opportunity. They want to share what they know. Not all of them do. Paige pointed out that some of them are going to be sitting in the back quietly. So, but a lot of them, they want to share what they know, and they want to do something fun. So if you're able to do those 3 things, allow them to share what they know, allow them to do something interesting or fun, and getting their attention, giving you their attention, will be helpful.
Can I add to that?
Please do.
One thing I'll
Please do.
say for younger audiences is, because they want to get your attention, you need to sort of set the rules right away. Okay, everyone, I know you're excited, but here's how things are going to work. I'm going to talk for a little bit, and then we're going to open it up for questions. Or if you set sort of the precedence, because you may find you walk into a young group of students and you immediately get, you know, start getting, before you've said a word. And so you sort of have to try to be able to keep the focus on what it is that you want to be able to share with them. And if questions come in that are like, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about, you can acknowledge it in a nice, polite way and redirect the conversation. In terms of slides, keeping lots of pictures, a few bullets can be good, but very simplistic terms. And you can verbally throw in some higher level terms, but keep what's on your slide understandable for that young audience, just to add that in.
Absolutely. Oma.
And if I can jump in, so 2 things. Earlier, when we were talking about moving around the room, we refer to that as proximity. And proximity is a classroom management strategy. As you move closer, typically that distance, as it decreases, that energy level starts to increase, and whatever's going on, as far as maybe not being engaged, that tends to also decrease. So we use it as a classroom management strategy. And so you should never be afraid to leave the podium when you are interacting with kids, whether they are interacting with participants, whether they are young or old. So I wanted to make sure I inserted that in there. As also with respect to working with young children, what Paige is talking about, you want to make sure you teach the strategy first before you actually get into the talk. So what that means is, whenever I go out and I'm talking to a group of kids in a setting that I have never been in before, I will typically ask maybe the teacher who's of that classroom, or maybe the administrator in that particular building, is there a call or a chant that the school has already set in place that gets everyone's attention? To give you an example, if I were to say 1, 2, 3,
Eyes on me.
she already knows exactly what to say. That's a really, really common one. There's clapping chants, there's all sorts of attention getters. We refer to that as attention getters that you can immediately use to bring your audience back. But if you're not common to that environment, then all you do is ask the simple question, hey, are there any quick attention getters that I need to know about so that I can get my audience attention back? And you can easily incorporate that into your presentation. That's always helpful. And of course, like Paige said, pictures, any type of interaction activities that you can do. The last big thing that I wanted to say is always state in the affirmative what you want students to be doing. And when you see it, praise it. So I can see right now you are slanting, you are moving forward, your eyes and your ears are tracking, you are leaning forward. That, because kids, you often want to please at times, when they hear you praising and they see and they look over, oh, he's doing what she's asking me to do, the other kids will start to do that as well. So it's a really quick technique by stating in the positive what you want, and when you see it, restating it, making sure that folks are aware that yes, you're acknowledging this positive behavior that you see going on. So that's something else that you can incorporate.
Thank you. I'm trying to remember if I had anything else. Just to be aware of what different audience members know. It's already been stated, avoid terminology. Sometimes you might not know what is terminology for them. But Paige, I imagine some of your scientists come to you and ask you, is this something that they would know? Would they know this word already? Is this something new I'm introducing? And so you're welcome to come to an educator, a partner, whoever's invited you to the talk. What will people know? Children will know the names of the planets, starting at a certain age. There are 4-year-olds out there who have them memorized. There are 3-year-olds, there are 8-year-olds who don't. So there's a mixture there. They'll know something. They've seen pictures of Saturn with the rings or outlines of it. They may not remember that that's Saturn, but they might. They may know that Jupiter's big. But there's a lot of other things that we assume that people know that they don't already know. So if those are important, then you need to find ways to connect to what they know and put that in. And frankly, what kids know is often true for adults too, with certain exceptions. One of the categories, if you're giving a talk for an amateur astronomy club, they're going to know a lot more about all of these things. And they might be more comfortable with some technical knowledge, but being an amateur astronomy club, they might be less familiar with geological terms in terms of planetary science, but more comfortable with astronomical terms. They'll be very comfortable with magnitude, absolute magnitude and apparent magnitude of a planet or an asteroid. They might be more comfortable with some of the concepts around radio astronomy and different ways that we observe. They might be more familiar with some of the missions, but they may or may not be comfortable with different types of rocks and minerals. So this is already things that you've heard and seen and we've talked about. What other questions do we have so far? Are there any other questions in the room or virtually? Grace, are there any that we missed?
No, I think we're good. And I want to make sure we have time for the polls. So we only have, we're almost at the hour.
Yeah.
There is one additional question that actually I posed, but it had come out of some conversations with scientists. But I think maybe we do the polls and then if there's extra time afterward, what do you think?
Let's go ahead and let's start the final poll questions. We appreciate everybody who's attending and we'd like your feedback on this to help inform future talks. So here's the evaluation polls. That question that you have while people are looking at this, can you go ahead and read that question out loud for all of us in the room who may or may not be able to read it from our point of view?
Sure. So this was a question that I've come up against. Maybe you didn't do your homework and you didn't adapt your talk ahead of time. So what if you're in the middle of giving a presentation that you've prepared and you realize that it's falling flat? Do y'all have some tips for ways to adapt in the moment to recapture attention, especially if you're working with slides or materials that cannot be changed right then.
So we're all laughing, and right here, this is where I want to say and reiterate, insert humor as much as you possibly can, and don't ever take yourself too seriously. This can happen to just about anybody, and you can do as much homework as you possibly can, and then the inevitable will happen and it just falls flat. And so I would switch to a question and answer session. I would just deviate and immediately go on the fly and start asking kids what they want to know, what they already know. Try to make it as interactive through a questioning and answering a scenario as much as you can. Being a primarily middle school, elementary, pre-service teacher educator, I have a lot of things in my back pocket as far as like hand gestures and tools that I could use. When I saw and prepared for this talk and I was trying to figure out what could I do that was bodily kinesthetic, I immediately remembered hand gestures, and that's something that works well in a virtual environment. So if I were in an environment where it fell flat, I would be thinking, well, what are some ways that I can make this interactive without the use of stuff? And so that's your body, talking, and any visuals that you can do, whether it's with your body language or through an interaction, audience participation, call and response even, to kind of get you through the time that you have focused there. And don't be afraid to say, well, this is not working out. And then, it really humanizes you. And I always say, not taking yourself so seriously, not being so wrapped up in the title and who you are at that particular moment can really, really be helpful. And I like to say that most audience members, when they realize what's happening and you're truthful in the moment, they usually are on your side. So humor, don't take yourself too seriously, and you'll get through it.
Thank you. Paige, do you have anything to add?
Well, I'll just say that it can be really hard to process things in multiple ways, where you're thinking about what you're saying, you're trying to look at the audience, and you're like, wait, what do I do? And so, like Oma said, you really do have to think about and take a step back, and it's okay to say, you know what, let's approach this in a different fashion. But for you, you're processing a lot of input at the same time while you're thinking, so it's not easy. So if you're like, oh my God, that was so awful, if you have an experience, reflect on it and think about what changes you would make for the next time if you were unable to make a change sort of right off the bat. Because it is not easy to think on the fly and make a change when you're like, but I was already prepared to do this. So not easy to do, but I agree with what Oma has said.
If anyone has any other suggestions or recommendations, you're welcome to put them in the chat. We are going to stop streaming now, but please join me in thanking our speakers.